All right. So we're gonna get into another live recording of the Elite Development Podcast pretty soon here. I'm just gonna give it a little bit of time before we get into it. See if we got anybody tuning in to watch live today. And so, as you guys tune in, drop me a win for the day. Drop me something that you're happy about, something that you've got that you're excited about that's coming up. Caden Stock, thanks for joining in. I appreciate you being here. And what we're going to be talking about today when we get into the show is why the hardest worker in the room mentality is broken. Because, we'll get into it in a minute here, but there's just this is something I've been passionate about for a long time. And honestly, it's the mentality that I've built my entire business on. And so I'm excited to get into this one. Excited to talk about a little bit of the backlash of getting into this topic. But I think it's going to be a really important one, a really good one. But as I mentioned, as you tune in, drop a win, drop something that's happened for you recently or that you've made happen recently that you're excited about. Drop me something that you're excited about that you have coming up. Get the conversation started. But also, before we get into it, as a reminder, the people I want watching this show are athletes, coaches of athletes, parents of athletes, anyone involved in that journey. So as you tune in, make sure to share this with someone that is involved in that athlete journey, somebody that is playing a part in athletes reaching the next level in their sport and becoming better versions of themselves. But let's get into the show, and we're going to be talking about why the hardest worker in the room mentality is broken. And we're going to get into it in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the show designed to help athletes gain an edge on their opponent and build their dream careers in sport. And today, we're going to be talking about why the hardest worker in the room mentality is broken. So I just want to preface this before we get into the show at all, that I am not telling anyone that they don't have to work hard to succeed in a sport. I am not here saying to be lazy. I'm not here telling you that hard work isn't important. So before you get upset, understand that. This is not me telling you that hard work is not important. I just want to come right out and say it because I know anytime I've spoken about this in the past, I've had people come back at me with, talking about why I shouldn't tell people not to work hard. So I just want to come right out and say it. That is not what I'm doing here. I'm not telling you that hard work is not important. But the reason I wanted to bring this topic to you, the reason I wanted to get into the hardest worker in the room mentality and why I believe it's broken is because to an extent, I agree with it. To an extent, yes, in order to succeed, you need to be the hardest worker around. You need to be willing to do what other people aren't willing to do. You need to be willing to go the extra mile. There is a lot that you need to be able to do, or you need to be willing to do that others won't, which will separate you long-term in your sport. However, why I struggle with this mentality and why I believe this mentality is broken is that I think people get lost. Well, actually, I don't think, I know people get lost in the mantra of being the hardest worker in the room. And instead of focusing their time on doing effective work, they focus their time on simply doing more, whether or not it's actually serving a purpose for them. So, how many times have you heard a young athlete brag to you that they trained for 4 hours the day before and, they could barely walk the whole next day and, oh, they're so beat up and sore and in pain, but it's because I'm a beast, or like some sort of, way of saying that. And personally, I hear it all the time. I always have people telling me how much harder they work than everybody else. But when I break it down with them and I ask them, what kind of training are you doing? And how does this training actually benefit you in your sport? They don't have an answer for me. So how I've used this concept of the hardest worker in the room mentality being broken to actually build my entire business, my entire coaching philosophy is, again, not telling people that hard work's not important, not telling people that they don't have to work hard if they want to succeed, but simply understanding the point of training in the first place. If you're a young athlete, why are you training? Why are you in the gym? What are you hoping to achieve with your time in the gym? As a rule, especially if you're following this show, you're generally someone who has a goal specific to their sport, someone who wants to be a national champion, a world champion, professional, whatever it might be. And your training should be pushing you towards that. Your training should be helping you move in that direction. So if you're sitting here and you're looking at how you train right now, you're sitting here and you're looking at the ways you spend your time in the gym, and you don't see how it actually translates to your sport, that is a problem. That is something that you need to address. And I see this with coaches as well, where they talk about, well, my program's the hardest program. Nobody can get through my training. Like, nobody can get through my training and feel okay the next day. And if your coach has ever said something like that to you, run the other way really, really far. Because the goal of training for a sport is not to be the one who sweats the most. The goal of training for a sport is not to be the one who can't walk the next day. The goal of training for a sport is not to be the one who spent the most hours in the gym. The goal of training for a sport is to perform in the sport. The goal of training for a sport is to be at your best on the day that you need to perform. It's that simple. So no, you don't need to be the hardest worker in the room. And yes, you do need to work hard, but the goal should not be the one who spends the most hours, or be the one who sweats the most, or be the one who's in the most pain the next day. The goal is always, if it's being done correctly, be the one who performs the best when it matters most. So if we're speaking to athletes right now, remember that that is the focus of your training. Because I've had so many conversations with young athletes in all different disciplines, but especially the last few years as my business is focused down into more combat sports. I've had so many conversations with young athletes where I ask them about their current training schedule, and they tell me things like, I had one that told me every Friday night he goes for a 3-hour run. And I kind of just stopped and I was like, okay, like, talk to me about that. Why are you running 3 hours every Friday night? And he told me, because I need to be the hardest worker in the room. I need to be willing to do stuff that other people aren't willing to do. It's like, okay, like I get where you're coming from. But, how do your shins feel after that 3-hour run? It's like, well, they hurt. Like, everything kind of doesn't really feel great the next day. It's like, but, I'm grinding. It's like, well, okay, good. Like, you're grinding. That's great. But now, how does your training session on Saturday go? He was sparring on Saturdays as well. How does that Saturday training session go if you ran for 3 hours Friday night and your shins are in pain and your knees are in pain and everything hurts? How do you feel when you go into the gym on Saturday? And, well, very clearly, not very good. He's taking away from the sparring session on Saturday through being the hardest worker in the room on Friday. So yes, it is very important that you train hard, but an example like that just shows the importance, over top of training hard, of training smart. And the other reason why something like these 3-hour runs that people are using to prepare themselves for a fight is just it's just a ridiculous way to go, is the other question I asked was, when was the last time you had a 3-hour long fight? Well, never. So why is running for 3 hours the right way to prepare you for a 9 to 15-minute fight? It's just not. But people get caught in that mentality of, I have to be the one that works the hardest, and lose the focus on the actual purpose of the training, which is to be at your best for that 9 to 15-minute fight. And obviously, if you're not a combat sports athlete, you can take that and put it to the actual necessity of your sport too. But the whole idea is that it's not just about doing more, it's about being better prepared for the competition that you actually have. So when you're training, what I really want people to be able to take away from this is that when you're training, the training needs to reflect what you actually need in the sport. My goal here isn't to get super technical on you all, because I feel like there are so many strength and conditioning podcasts out there that, break down the intricacies of every movement and all of that. And that's not why I'm here. But why I'm here, and the message I really want to deliver, is that the goal of your training is to prepare you for your sport. So if you're here and you're hearing the message that, the hardest worker in the room mentality is broken, and you're thinking, oh, this dick is telling me not to work hard, stop. That is not what I'm doing. My goal here is to help you understand that your training has to have a purpose. Your training has to have a benefit. And if you're losing the benefit of what you're doing and you don't understand how what you're doing is actually translating to improving your performance in the sport, something's broken. And when that training becomes ego driven, when the sole focus becomes showing people that you're willing to do what nobody else is willing to do, that's great. But if you're burning yourself out coming into competition, you're going to end up losing your competition despite all your crazy hard hours of training. So what I really want to get across to you guys is that the one question you should be asking yourself at all times while you train is, how is this actually going to benefit me in the sport? So if you're looking at your own schedule and you're seeing that 3-hour run every Friday night as an example, and you're training for, again, as an example, a professional MMA fight that lasts 15 minutes, ask yourself, how is running for 3 hours going to best prepare me for a 15-minute MMA fight? And this is also not saying that every training session you do has to perfectly mimic the timeline of the competition you're preparing for. But personally, if I've got someone preparing for a professional MMA fight that's going to be 3 5-minute rounds, instead of running for 3 hours, what I would have them do is run for high pace at 25 to 30 minutes. Because again, it's not the exact same duration, but if you can keep a high pace for 30 minutes, you can keep an even higher pace for 15. Whereas the pace you're keeping at 3 hours is going to be so low, and it's going to beat your body up so much that despite you working harder in that time, you're taking way more time and you're getting way less benefit. So again, the goal here is to teach you to audit your training. The goal here is to teach you that your training has to have a purpose. And if that purpose is to perform in a sport, if that purpose is to be at your best for 3 5-minute rounds with 1 minute in between each one, that session needs to look a lot different than if your goal is to perform in a marathon, right? Because those are different energy systems, different demands from the muscles. Everything about those two different competitions is different. Now, if everything about the competition is different, your training needs to reflect that. You need to be fast. You need to be explosive. You need to be strong. And as a result, your training needs to be improving your strength, improving your explosiveness, and then improving your ability to repeat that over a shorter duration of time. So I hope this sheds a little bit of light onto what I'm talking about here. And if you listened to this, if you watched this, and you're still hearing me just say, don't work so hard, get your head out of your ass. I don't know what else to say at this point. The goal of this episode was to really just get into the fact that your training needs to reflect your sport. You shouldn't be focused simply on being the one who works the hardest, being the one who goes for longest. Your goal and your focus needs to be around being the one who is best prepared for the physical demands of the sport, nothing else. So that is it. That is all. Thank you all who tuned in live. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. If you are watching this back on the YouTube channel, if you are listening back to this on the podcast, make sure to drop me a comment. Let me know that you're here. Let me know that you're watching. And drop me a comment with your biggest takeaway. Let me know what it was you took away from this, and then how you can make a positive change to your training now that is going to benefit you in the long term. If you are new to the podcast, make sure that you are checking out the podcast website, www.elitedevelopmentpodcast.ca, or checking it out on all the major platforms. That's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, basically anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. And downloading some more episodes and sharing these episodes with teammates, with coaches, with friends, anybody that can benefit from hearing this message. So I appreciate you being here. That's it for me. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all again soon.